Adapting a 50-year-old theme park ride into a feature film was widely considered a corporate suicide mission. The pirate genre had been box office poison for decades, making the entire premise sound like a desperate, hollow merchandise grab. Instead, it accidentally created the defining cinematic icon of the 2000s and completely rewired the modern blockbuster. Across 5 films, the franchise hauled in over $4.5 billion worldwide, with the second and fourth installments each crossing the billion-dollar mark. But that massive commercial momentum masked a brutal, linear, critical collapse. What started as a universally praised 80% hit steadily degraded into a bloated 30% disaster by the 5th entry. The evolution of this series is a masterclass in how Hollywood misunderstands its own success. How does a razor-sharp lightning-in-a-bottle adventure mutate into an exhausting, incomprehensible spectacle? The answer lies in watching a franchise slowly forget exactly what made its most famous pirate so captivating in the first place. Jack Sparrow is the face on the lunchbox, but Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann are the actual engine of this franchise. Their relationship isn't a romantic subplot tacked onto a pirate adventure. It is the structural spine that keeps the supernatural absurdity grounded. Without them, the films lose their emotional stakes, a reality the later sequels learn the hard way. Will and Elizabeth operate on inverted character arcs that perfectly balance each other. Will begins as an earnest, rule-abiding blacksmith who despises pirates, fighting Jack with rigid traditional swordplay in the smithy. He slowly compromises his rigid morality for love, ultimately accepting the cursed mantle of Davy Jones and condemning himself to a decade of ferrying the dead. He sacrifices his freedom so his friends can keep theirs. Elizabeth, conversely, transforms from a constrained, aristocratic damsel, literally suffocating in a corset, into a ruthless, cunning pirate king. She learns that survival requires betrayal. The defining moment of her arc isn't a sword fight. It's the end of Dead Man's Chest, where she kisses Jack to distract him, chaining him to the mast to be eaten by the Kraken. She murders the franchise mascot in cold blood, so the rest of her crew can escape. Their romance is defined by constant, brutal interruption. Look at the opening of Dead Man's Chest. Elizabeth sitting in the pouring rain in her ruined wedding dress, her marriage halted by Beckett's forces. Gore Verbinski uses the weather and the camera to visually communicate that the world itself is hostile to their happiness. This culminates in the maelstrom battle of At World's End. Verbinski shoots their wedding not as a romantic detour, but as the chaotic climax of their shared trauma. They are frantically shouting their vows while parrying swords in the middle of a literal whirlpool. The editing cuts rapidly between intimate close-ups of their faces and wide shots of the swirling abyss, perfectly mirroring their relationship. When their arc concludes with that bittersweet 10-year separation, the emotional resonance of the franchise peaks. This is why the 4th film, On Stranger Tides, feels completely adrift. It attempts to replace the Will and Elizabeth dynamic with a hollow romance between a missionary and a mermaid, which carries zero narrative weight. By the 5th film, the filmmakers realize their mistake, and the entire plot of Dead Men Tell No Tales becomes entirely dependent on resolving Will and Elizabeth's tragedy. When Will, finally freed from his curse, walks up that grassy hill to embrace Elizabeth, it is the only time the 5th film manages to evoke the magic of the original trilogy. But the emotional void left by Will and Elizabeth exposes a much larger problem: the tragic devolution of Captain Jack Sparrow. Jack's character arc is one of the most glaring examples of franchise Flanderization in modern cinema. In the first film, his eccentricities are a weaponized disguise. His drunken swagger masks a highly competent, calculating, and legendary tactician. Consider his introduction in The Curse of the Black Pearl. He stands proudly on the mast of a dinghy that is rapidly taking on water. Verbinski holds the wide shot, letting the visual comedy play out in silence, right up until Jack perfectly times his step off the sinking mast onto the Port Royal dock. It is hilarious, but it also establishes him as a man with impeccable timing and total spatial awareness. The Jack Sparrow of the original trilogy drives the plot through deception. He cleverly takes Elizabeth hostage to retrieve his effects, he manipulates Will into helping him steal a ship, and he constantly plays his enemies against each other. The camera observes his cleverness, letting the audience in on the joke that Jack is always 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. By Dead Men Tell No Tales, the mask has permanently fused to his face. He is completely stripped of his agency, depicted as a destitute, luckless drunk who stumbles passively through the story. He doesn't outsmart his enemies. He survives purely by accident and digital stunt work. The brilliant tactician is replaced by a walking punchline who has lost the respect of his crew and the audience. The breaking point for his character occurs early in the 5th film. A mud-covered, pathetic Jack trudges into a dingy tavern and trades his beloved magical compass for a single bottle of rum. This is the same compass he protected with his life across 3 films, the artifact that points to what you want most in the world. Trading it for a drink isn't just rock bottom for the character, it is a fundamental betrayal of who Jack Sparrow is. This loss of narrative discipline isn't limited to the characters. The franchise runs on a very specific currency, cursed antagonists. But the visual and narrative complexity of these curses escalates so drastically that it eventually crushes the storytelling. The trajectory of the villains perfectly mirrors the franchise's shift from grounded, practical filmmaking to overwhelming digital spectacle. In The Curse of the Black Pearl, the supernatural elements are deployed with masterful restraint. The curse is simple. Whoever takes the Aztec gold becomes undead, unable to feel pleasure or pain. When Barbossa steps into the moonlight and reveals his skeletal form to a horrified Elizabeth, the visual effect is terrifying because it is rooted in practical lighting and physical stakes. The curse has clear rules, clear consequences, and a clear physical cure. Dead Man's Chest introduces Davy Jones, which remains a landmark achievement in visual effects. The introduction of his writhing, tentacle beard and barnacle-encrusted features is visually stunning, but it also marks the beginning of the Arms Race. The Flying Dutchman crew are elaborate sea life mutations, blending body horror with maritime myth. It works because Verbinski grounds the CGI in a grimy, tactile reality, the ship drips with actual slime, and the curse feels like a physical rot. But by the time we reach Captain Salazar in Dead Men Tell No Tales, the visual language has completely unmoored itself from reality. Salazar and his crew are shattered, ash-like ghosts with perpetually floating hair, defying physics in a way that feels weightless and artificial. The camera lingers on the cracked, decaying details of Salazar's face, but the intricate CGI lacks the visceral punch of Barbossa's simple skeleton. The curse has become a convoluted excuse for digital noise, replacing narrative tension with visual bloat. If Jack Sparrow is trapped in a state of arrested development and the visual effects collapse under their own weight, Hector Barbossa stands alone. He undergoes the most dynamic and compelling character evolution in the entire collection. Barbossa is the only character allowed to genuinely age, adapt, and change. He begins as the terrifying, mutinous captain of the Black Pearl, but his arc turns on a single, brilliant sensory detail, the green apple. When Jack shoots him and the curse is lifted, Barbossa drops the apple, looking genuinely shocked as he finally feels the cold sting of mortality. That moment of vulnerability resets the character, allowing him to return in the sequels not as a villain, but as Jack's bitter, pragmatic rival. Barbossa's survival instinct is his defining trait. In On Stranger Tides, he is revealed to be working as a privateer for the British Crown, complete with a powdered wig and a formal naval uniform. He sacrifices his pirate pride and his own leg, simply to survive and plot his revenge against Blackbeard. While Jack refuses to change with the times, Barbossa manipulates the changing world to his advantage. This pragmatism makes his final act in Dead Men Tell No Tales so powerful. Discovering that the astronomer Karina is his long-lost daughter, the ruthless survivor finally finds something he values more than his own life, when he intentionally lets go of the anchor chain, plunging into the abyss to kill Salazar and save her. It is a definitive end. He dies not as a cursed monster or a greedy pirate, but as a heroic father. Barbossa's death signifies the true end of the pirate era that the franchise originally celebrated. The collection started as a brilliant subversion of the swashbuckler genre, anchored by sharp character writing and practical stakes. But as the mythology expanded and the digital spectacle took over, the films forgot that the magic was never in the curses or the CGI monsters. The magic was in watching clever, desperate people try to outsmart the inevitable. The tragedy of this franchise is how quickly it forgot that a pirate ship is only as compelling as the mortals desperately trying to steer it. Disney spent billions chasing the high of that first adventure, building increasingly massive digital oceans while completely abandoning the human heartbeat that made the water feel dangerous. We didn't fall in love with a brand or a Halloween costume. We fell in love with people willing to damn themselves just to save each other. When you strip away the cursed gold and the CGI leviathans, the series becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when a studio mistakes the mascot for the soul. Now the property sits stranded in development hell, with executives endlessly debating how to reboot a universe that already exhausted its own mythology. They are searching for a new compass heading, completely missing the irony that the map was burned a long time ago. Because no matter how much money you pour into the hull, a ghost ship is still just a vessel for the dead.